And joining us now on the debate in the nation's capital, we welcome John McKay, the Liberal MP for Scarborough-Guildwood. And here in studio, Cheri DiNovo, NDP MPP for Parkdale-High Park. Chris Stockwell, the former PC MPP for Etobicoke Centre. And we welcome back Marci McDonald, author of The Armageddon Factor. Now, a reminder that we call this a Your Agenda Thursday broadcast because we want your participation. You can reach us via Twitter at twitter.com/theagenda or by email at theagenda@tvo.org. We'll put your comments up on the screen during the course of the program. And there's our fifth column blogger, Mike Miner, who's hosting a live chat on our Inside Agenda blog at tvo.org/theagenda. So please jump in the many ways we're offering and join our debate. Okay, let's just start. Cheri, to you first. You've heard the thrust of what's in the Armageddon Factor. Your feedback.
Well, I have to say I share with Marci some of the concerns, certainly the concerns over the recent moves that Harper has made, and we've voiced that. We've been very vociferous in the Ontario legislature about that from the New Democratic Party. I'm also a United Church minister, and I'm part of the largest Protestant denomination in Canada still. We're much more secular in our religious practices here than they are in the States, more like Europe. But this is a denomination that supports same-sex marriage. It supports freedom of choice. I, in fact, performed the first legalized same-sex marriage myself. This weekend, I'm putting hands on an ordination of the first trans person in Canada. I would say that there's a huge progressive voice in faith communities, not just Christian, but across the way. And I think that's the predominant Canadian faith voice. I think, again, most people are secular in Canada. I'm not too worried. I'm not losing sleep about the religious right, but I think, you know, there's a case to be made for being vigilant.
John McKay, what do you say?
Well, initially when I read the book, or I started reading the book, I thought it was a bit of a hyperventilating left-wing screed, but I think over the course of the book, Marci actually does a considerable service to highlight the depth and growth of the evangelical and Catholic movement in Canada and their insistence on taking a role in the public square. And I think actually she's done a tremendous service, and it's something that I've thought for years up here, that the press in particular either doesn't know or doesn't care about the faith views of about 4 or 5 million Canadians, many of whom are very active in all segments of our society.
Just so we know where everybody's coming from tonight, Cheri already told us she's a United Church minister. John, fair to say you're a person of faith, right? You're a religious person?
That's right. Yeah. I go to a large evangelical church in Toronto. Okay,
and do you find that debate or discussion around religious issues or in your dealings with it on the Hill, it's marginalized somehow by the mainstream media?
I just think ignored would be probably a better way to say it. That people are, well, I thought Cheri kind of put it well, that there's kind of an assumption that the secular view would prevail, and that's, I don't think, a warranted assumption. I think Marci's book moves us along towards a more respectful pluralism, where views from all faith groups, including secular, have a degree of respect and acceptance and thoughtfulness so that our society can move forward. And I think she has contributed to the debate in a useful way.
Okay, let's find out where Chris Stockwell's coming from, just to sort of remind everybody, because you've been out of public life for a little while. You were an MPP in the Harris government, Mike Harris government in Ontario. You were a cabinet minister in that government for a while, so you sat around a cabinet table and in a caucus with others who were social conservatives. Mm-hmm. You are not, though?
No.
Are you a religious person at all?
Well, I'm a Christian, and I certainly believe in God, but no, I don't attend any church on a regular basis.
Okay, the kinds of debates that she has brought up in the book about the potential, and she may quibble with me here, but I'm still going to say it, the potentially nefarious involvement of the Christian right in the making of public policy. How did you find that manifesting itself at the Harris cabinet table?
I never found it. I absolutely never, ever, ever found it. I never once found a case, and I was racking my brains, actually, because you asked me to come on here for the last few days. And I'm trying to, I knew there was a Christian caucus committee. I never went. I knew there was about 13 or 15 of them on there, or roughly, prayer breakfast, so on. But I never actually heard it come up in a discussion, and that's 25 years around the party. right to the cabinet level, and I never once heard any argument made or any push made based on what I would classify as a fundamental Christian.
Why do you think not?
Well, I don't think it happens, quite candidly. I just don't believe it happened. I don't think any public policy was based on that.
But there were social conservatives at that cabinet table?
But I believe everyone brings, I mean, you may well said it the best, everyone brings their life experience to the table.
Exactly.
And that forms their thinking. It forms their political thought process. I don't think you have to espouse it, but it comes in that vein. Having said that, this is not new to us, frankly, especially federally. I mean, for 20 years, this argument's been made, ever since Preston Manning came along. Oh my gosh, if you elect that guy, that funny talking Westerner, you won't be able to get an abortion. It's terrible, terrible stuff will happen. And it worked, and the Liberals were good at it. And the NDP didn't, they were right behind. We couldn't get elected, and I bet. Then we got a minority government under Harris. So they can't
Harper.
use that, under Harper. Then they can't use that argument now. So this book seems to me to be stage 2. All right, they were waiting for a majority to screw us over. If you give them a majority, then all these terrible things are going to happen. And I kind of throw my arms up and go, really? Are we still really having that debate?
I'm going to ask our director, Michael Smith, can you put that comment back on that we just saw? Because I want to read that and let Marci comment on it. This was something we got via email. Stephen Harper has indeed come through for voters of faith, especially recently when he cut off support for abortions outside of Canada. That's the G8 issue we've been talking about. That indeed is a small victory for us and a sign for the future. Now, when you hear that, Marci, what do you think?
Oh, I agree with them. I think it is. They do see it as a victory. And what astonished me when Harper announced his G8 initiative on maternal and child health care was that everyone then said they were so surprised at the outcry. Anyone who knows this government knows they game everything out. They know exactly which constituency will be for or against. They figured every angle out before they announce a policy. Interestingly enough, for several weeks, they did not spell out whether family planning and abortion would be part of it. They let the various constituencies take their positions. And then when Bev Oda, who is the minister, who I believe is pro-choice anyway, announced that the abortion would not be funded as part of this initiative on Canada's behalf. She had a huge Harper had a huge conservative constituency saying, we're not going to let those pro-choice people spoil a perfectly good initiative for women's health around the world.
Okay,
and who did he appeal to? But the women who are voting for him.
Okay, stand by. I want to go to John McKay again on this because it's not that simple to say the conservatives are all on one side of this and the liberals are all on the other side of this.
No, of course
The
not.
fact is there are a lot of social conservative, pro-life liberals in your caucus, John, right? Who
That's correct.
probably would have appreciated this decision that the Harper government made.
Well, ironically, Steve, I was at 7:30 this morning. I was at a maternal health initiative put on by World Vision. It was actually kind of depressing because it is a worthwhile initiative, and it was laid out to us what they hope to expect over this initiative, and it's been derailed essentially by a domestic debate, and it kind of speaks to the difficulties that one has in this country to have a maturity of discussion about this particular issue. It is a kind of the third rail of Canadian politics, and what I regret at the end of the day is for those women and children in developing countries who may have their own health compromised by virtue of what is essentially a domestic debate. I just frankly don't think Canada nor our political class looks very good in this entire exercise, and so how to right this ship, I don't really know, but it is a divisive debate. It is a visceral debate. Your email tree will light up as soon as as soon as we go on this. I can assure you that tomorrow morning I will be facing 25 nasty emails for saying what is, I think, relatively neutral comment on this debate.
Cheri wants in.
The reality is that women die from lack of access to safe abortions around the world all the time. It's a major cause of maternal death. That's the reality. And I think any person of faith who is concerned about saving lives, which I hope we all are, would be concerned about that, whatever they feel personally about the issue.
Let me
You better rein this one in.
I was going to say here, we don't want this to turn into a show
yeah.
about a debate about abortion. We're really trying to find out about where that intersection of faith and public policy meet. And to that end, again, lest anybody think this is conservatives all think one way, liberals all think another way, I want you to take us inside your caucus, because I think I'm right about saying that your former leader, Howard Hampton, may have had one view, here we are again, on abortion, and his wife, who was in the same caucus, was pro-life. And you had some probably pretty testy discussions in that caucus about that.
Happily, Steve, before my time.
Oh, you weren't in there yet.
I wasn't in there yet. So, but I think I mean, to a person, we stood up with X's across our mouths, and it went viral on the internet, saying we will not shut up about women's rights in our caucus. And those were all the women, including our leader, Andrea Horvath. So we've gone on record about the recent attempts to muzzle women, the recent attempts to cut funding for maternal health. I mean, there's no question we're all on a page about that. Do we have different faith perspectives? Some with none, some with lots. Yes, absolutely.
Chris, talk to me about this one then. When the Harris government was in power in this province, the same-sex issue was pretty hot and heavy. Mm-hmm. And it came down from on high that Ontario had to get all of its laws kind of lined up in favor of same-sex. And even though there were social conservatives inside the Harris government, they didn't fight it. They did it.
Yeah, they did. And frankly, it was a legal issue at that point in time. Now, I don't know if that left them off the hook. I'm not sure.
Gave them an out, that's for sure.
Well, it certainly gave them an out. But it was an interesting non-discussion.
A non-discussion?
I don't recall much discussion about it. No, I don't recall anyone. I think the argument was made, the legal argument was made. Everyone said, well, I guess that's basically it.
Well, you could have appealed it.
Well, I think we did appeal it at one point. I don't remember.
I don't think you did.
I think Mike actually took it on himself and pushed it through, actually personally.
I think you rewrote 67 or so statutes saying that they would comply with the new same-sex regulations.
And I think he had a position on it, and the position was not agreed to by all, I guarantee you. But I think he kind of put his foot down and said, no, we're doing this.
I mean, there's a classic case where the religious right lost. I mean, flat out. We're debating Charles McVitie all the time. Michael Corey and others on this very issue all the time. They lost. End of story. That, I think, speaks to the general tenor of the Canadian populace in terms of their faith and politics.
Marci, doesn't the Christian right do a lot more losing than winning in this country?
Well, that's their complaint, that they have indeed. And that's why they felt it was time to get organized with all of these. And we're not just talking about one lobby. We're talking about a half dozen different organizations, and Preston Manning, who doesn't actually have a center in Ottawa, but doing training so that Christians know how to speak when they come forth into public debate, and they just don't pelt politicians with Bible verses and threats of wrath.
No, that's because of you and the other parties. They're vilified. They're vilified.
Well, I've never vilified them.
Well, I read your book. I mean, your interview there, you're backing up so fast, you could have been beeping. Your book was far more tough than what I heard over there. They're vilified, and they're attacked, and they're taken to task. I mean, I'm not a religious, fundamental Christian, but I hear it. If it ever came out, you can see if they bring that up. He won an election. He said, "God bless Canada." I mean, and that drew a reaction.
A lot of people had a problem with that.
Are you kidding? That to me is unbelievable. He said, "God bless Canada."
So you think I'm vilifying Christians because I report
on the reaction? No, I think you're vilifying the conservative movement, the right-wing conservative movement. You start taking positions that they take and say, well, this is a code language for a Christian, this is a code language Christian win. You use that a few times in your book. It's code language. Well, the position on Israel and so on, all my conservative friends who aren't, fundamental Christian, they think it's the right position to take. Not because it's a Christian value or religion, it's just fundamentally fair.
John, let me bring you in at this point and ask you about this. I'm wondering about a double standard here. If you are a Christian in this country, the likes of Cheri DiNovo, who is quote unquote progressive and perhaps left-leaning on a bunch of issues, do you believe the political system of this country kind of welcomes that or allows that, whereas if you're a social conservative with those kinds of Christian values, you got a bigger problem in this country. Is that accurate?
I think there has been a bit of a working assumption along those lines, and to wit, Preston Manning's Manning Institute, which teaches people in effect how to speak in the public square. I for years sat on the Justice Committee, and there were days that I just wanted to crawl underneath the table when I would listen to certain fundamentalist folks come and try to present a view on a particular justice issue, and they'd be preaching to the choir. I mean, they hadn't translated the language from the Sunday morning Bible thumping, if you will, to Monday. And so there was a learning curve, and I think EFC and a variety of other organizations, including Preston's organization, have, if you will, educated a lot of evangelicals and Catholics on how to speak into the marketplace of idea. And it is a language. It is a language that you have to learn, but it is a secular-based language. It's a rights-based language, and if you fail to learn that language, then you will be clobbered on Monday morning, even though you sounded terrific on Sunday morning.
Marci wants a follow-up here.
Well, you had asked John if, in fact, it was all right to be a liberal or leftist, evangelical or Christian, and not less so to be conservative. What's interesting is that Dennis Grunding, who is a former NDPer, has written and commented on the fact that it's the conservatives who are organized. And I'm interested in political movements, political lobbies. I wrote about corporate lobbyists having the government's ear under free trade. Now there's a new kind of lobby happening in Ottawa, and I think we have to know if we're going to have an informed democracy. Dennis Grunding said the left and liberals can only look with envy on what, in 4 or 5 short years, the conservative Christians have achieved.
Cheri, do you agree with that the religious left is not nearly as organized as the religious right in this country?
Well, let's put it this way. Of the folk that are lobbying us at Queen's Park, I think with high regard of the Anglican lobby that was all about housing and poverty issues. Sure. We're lobbied by faith groups about poverty issues and housing. I think that's appropriate. I'm glad they're there.
Not about abortion or capital punishment or that kind of thing?
Never mentioned. Always about social issues, which is where the church general, universal, is extremely strong. But I want to make a point too about democracy. I mean, I think the reason that the religious right, so to speak, hasn't had much of a voice is because they represent a very small part of the population. I mean, the reality is they're not growing the way they would like to grow. The reality is they're not taking over the way they, and this has been shown in a number of studies. We're not Americans. We're much more like Europeans in our religious practices.
Okay, John McKay wants in on that.
I think maybe Cheri's working on an assumption that's 5 or 10 years old.
I agree.
The stats show that evangelicals and active Catholics constitute about 20% of the population when you put them together. They over-participate, they overvote, they over-donate, and yes, they are fairly organized. The stats again show that 80+% people belong or identify as belonging to some faith group. But I think Marci rightly put it in her book that they're believers, not belongers. So on the issue of organization, I think that Marci has put her finger on a development. It's a political development, and I think that the left/progressive needs to look at this development. I don't think it necessarily needs to look at it with fear, because like Cheri, I too get lobbied, but I get lobbied about the social issues that you could expect to be lobbied about, i.e. foreign aid, poverty issues, housing, et cetera, et cetera. But frequently these are people of deep, profound faith who hold very significant views with respect to life and education and things of that nature, which are not mainstream.
Okay, let me forgive me, John, because I don't want to let the clock get away from us here. And while we're having this discussion both in the nation's capital and in our studio here in Toronto, there's a good debate going on online as well. People have gone to our website, tvo.org/theagenda. Mike Miner's monitoring the chat. Mike, come on in here from your undisclosed location and tell us what folks are saying.
Well, Steve, there was one person who wrote in under the name It Seems to Me, and he feels that a lot of the concerns about the religious right are just a kind of fear-mongering that are political tactics against Harper, concerns about what he might do, and it's not really based on religion, and it's not really based on anything other than political tactics. And there's a lot of people who agree with him. We have Omar on here who says that he has no problem with religion generally and thinks it's fine if politicians are particularly religiously engaged, but he does have a problem with Canadians trying to tell us that Canada should be a Christian country. He finds that idea threatening. Brendan agrees with Omar and says that, excuse me, Canada is not a Christian country, but a country of many faiths, and we should inform our political all should inform our political perspectives as long as they try not to impose ideology on us. We have some people who are coming from a very strong Christian standpoint. We have Coram Deo 519, which I assume means he's from Western Ontario, not chapter and verse, saying that attempting to silence the current Christian worldview perspective and erase its role in our history is a recent and very damaging social development. Brendan comes back to that with involving Christian faith is great if you want to advance things like Jesus' love of the poor. However, what really concerns people is that what they want to do is legislate morality and morals on that level. And Jamie Marchand wants to know, the show is about faith. He'd like to hear more about other faiths beyond just Christianity and what their role is in the public sphere.
Okay, fair enough. Mike, appreciate it. Stick around, continue monitoring, and we'll come back to you for a final checkup at the top of the clock, or just before the top of the clock. He mentioned the 519, and there are 3 numbers on the front of your book, and I want you to tell this story. I don't know, can we get a camera that can, Kevin, can you get this? Because I think people ought to see this, because these 3 numbers are interesting here. 728, 728. See if you can get a close-up on that. I don't know if it'll show on TV, does it? 728. Can you see it? It's really tough. Anyway, they are there, and there, you can sort of see it there. Tell the story about the Bible verse, 728, and the Peace Tower clock, 728.
An organization that has quite a lot of clout in Ottawa. The National House of Prayer was started by a couple, Rob and Fran Parker, from Vernon, BC. He's a Baptist minister, and his wife had talked to me about their activities. And the National House of Prayer sounds generally like a welcoming, sheltering place for Christians to go, but they actually are affiliated with a lot of people that have quite radical views. And she was telling me a view of Canada's role in the end times that I had heard from other groups, and that is that at Confederation, when a Father of Confederation had his daily Bible fall open at Psalm 72, verse 8, and he shall have dominion from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth, he went to the next Confederation conference in London and said, why are we having this debate about what to call Canada? Let's call it a dominion. Everyone agreed, it solved a problem, but to certain groups of very militant Christians who do believe that the end times are nigh and that this is why Canada must become a Christian country, this was the first sign that Canada had a unique end times role to play.
Marci, I'm going to rush you along here because we're running out of time. In her mind, you write, there is not the slightest doubt that celestial warning came on May 24th, 2006, when the Peace Tower clock stopped precisely at
7:28
a.m. And an hour that is the exact numerical composition of Psalm 72:8, the scriptural inscription for the country's birth. Now, that's a hell of a coincidence. If not, that's at least a hell of a coincidence, wouldn't you say?
She described it as a wake-up call from God, divine intervention, that we better get rid of same-sex marriage, we better get rid of having no legislation outlawing abortion, and shape up and become a Christian nation, and we could fulfill this unique end times role.
John, did you know that the Peace Tower clock stopped at 7:28 a.m.?
I didn't know that, and I didn't even realize that I'd read Marci's book on the weekend, and I didn't even realize it was in the cover.
Do you infer from that the end of days is nigh?
Yeah, well, we're going to have to change that verse from C to C to C, because we have 3.
There's a third C, that's right.
I want to speak to the general issue of Armageddon, end times theology, things of that nature. And there is kind of a whole branch of, how should we say, far out fundamentalism that takes some happenings in the world as quite literal, i.e. the reemergence of Israel as a nation in 1948 and things of that nature, and sees these things as portents of the end times. I think it is how should we say, very difficult application of incidents in time and place history to end times theology, but it does motivate some people, and I think one needs to be somewhat reserved about drawing too many conclusions.
Okay, let me put this up here. This is Jerry Nichols. I think most of you know. He used to work with Stephen Harper at the National Citizens Coalition. He is a conservative fellow and admits to being so. Here's what he wrote recently in the National Post. Stephen Harper is by no means an evangelical Christian. He's not even a social conservative. I worked with Harper for 5 years at the National Citizens Coalition. During all the time I knew him, he never displayed an ounce of zealotry. He never even talked about religion. He did, however, talk a lot about the intersection of religion and politics. For their part, social conservatives didn't like Harper much either. Recall that during the 2002 Canadian Alliance leadership race, they overwhelmingly supported Harper's main rival, Stockwell Day. Okay, Chris, to you first. Do you think then, given this, is the Harper government a non-religious, small government conservative party, really?
Yeah, I really think they are. I think the vast majority of MPs are. The ones that I know very well, I would say absolutely yes to, and they hold some pretty influential positions in the party, from the Flahertys, Clements, Bairds, and so on. Yeah, I do honestly believe they are a small C, and they're not, even the small C conservatives aren't happy with them all the time. They're not happy with their economic policies.
No kidding.
Yeah, they're not. So, when you govern, people don't like you, and you do things on certain fronts and you do things on other fronts. But to see it as what you're suggesting or alleging, I mean, I just have never ever seen it, and frankly, I can't find a single conservative that you would talk to or you did talk to who did see it.
Well, let me, okay, in 1 second, Marci, hang on. Cheri, how about you? Do you see this view of the Harper government as Jerry Nichols sees it?
Well, I think it's closer to the fact. However, and there's a big however, which I think Marci's pointing to, is I also see some real areas of concern, and particularly recently with the cuts to Kairos, a faith-based organization, by the way, cuts to women's groups, the whole abortion discussion. I think that's very concerning. I think it's concerning as a feminist and as a woman more than as a woman of faith. But it speaks to some kind of theology that I think, again, there needs to be a discussion around, probably within faith.
Okay, Marci.
What's so interesting about Jerry Nichols is that he talked to me, and he was having a sort of tirade about these religious right people, and then Harper interrupted him, and he said, "By the way, Jerry, I'm a Christian," and he had never mentioned it before or after. Now, this is what Jerry Nichols told me, but he acknowledged that Harper had described it as a strategy. At the time that Jerry Nichols worked with him, he didn't think it was a smart strategy, but he appeared to have changed his mind.
Strategy, you got to talk politics. This is a natural home for this constituency, is the Conservative Party. Just like the United Church is a natural home for the NDP and unions. So therefore, they build their strategy to attract that natural constituency. There's nothing wrong with that. And the United Church tries to influence in the NDP policy. Is there anything wrong with that? I don't think so.
I don't think they do. I wish
well,
they
maybe
would.
they don't, but they certainly try. And here is the Christian right doing exactly the same thing to the Conservative Party, and people write books about it.
But in fact, what we had was Stephen Harper in 2003 laying this out as a strategy. We will appeal to religious and social conservatives across faith lines, across ethnic lines.
So what?
So it's a strategy.
So what?
It's a party building strategy.
But what
if you're
is
doing
going to
that,
be? What's the end game? What happens in the end? What's terrible thing is going to happen?
if
Well,
you
can I
use
put a scenario
faith
on the
as a
table?
wedge, if you say
So use it as a wedge. It's a political tool.
some conservative Christian organizations are all right and others like Cairo should be funded,
Let me put
then
the scenario on the table if I can. John, with just a few minutes to go. John, let's suppose, we're going to go 25 years down the road, let's say. The religious right in Canada has succeeded in achieving some of its goals. Let's say, for example, they managed to find a government sympathetic to their view on, I'm pulling something out of thin air here, prohibiting abortions in the last, say, 2 or 3 months of a woman's gestation period. If they engaged in a battle of ideas and managed to convince a government to do that, is that okay?
Well, it is a democracy at the end of the day, and so I can't. That may be quite offensive to some people, but having said that, that it is a democracy, it is, you do try to influence the political agenda, and ultimately I think you try to move towards a respectful pluralism. So at the end of the day, we're still citizens of this nation. We may be some of us faith-driven, some of us not faith-driven, but nevertheless, the folks who are faith-driven deserve, expect, respect for their views. And I think that's ultimately what Marci's book's all about.
Okay, Cheri, let me try that same situation with you. If after the clash of ideas, a government in this country decided to pass a law prohibiting abortion under some circumstances, would that be okay?
Well, I would have to agree. It's a democracy. Majority rules. Would I, as part of a freedom of choice minority like that? Absolutely not. And then it's my right and democratic duty, I would say, to be in opposition to it, and which I was as from a 16-year-old on. So it's because of that opposition that we're now in the current situation, because of the opposition to the ban on same-sex marriage that we're currently in this situation. I don't see us moving back. I have great faith in the future of Canada and Canadians as being a socially progressive nation by and large. And I think Harper reflects that to some degree, even as a social conservative, even as an evangelical Christian.
You're clearly not part of this, but Chris, would you say there's a chunk of people in this country who kind of, they claim to be Democrats, but actually fear the Democratic debate because if they lose it, they don't like the consequences of
On
losing
which
that.
side?
Either side.
Well, of course there are. Lots of times you can't talk about an issue for fear of the one side has of losing the issue. And that's the problem we have, I think, in this country, in healthcare, in abortion, in same-sex marriage. I mean, the trouble that we have is if you took it to the people, I think you'd be surprised at the results if it were a referendum. I think all these people, particularly the media, who hover around Toronto, Ottawa, if they ever got out and talked to the folks in small-town Ontario or Alberta, they'd be shocked at the referendum results. I think we have a tough time sometimes having debates on the tough issues.
Last 30 seconds, Marci. Wrap it up if you would.
If nothing else comes out of my book but a reasonable debate on how much religiosity we want in our public square, then I think I'll have contributed something to that debate.
You've already done that, I think. Okay. John McKay, thank you very much for being there on the line in the nation's capital for us. We appreciate the Liberal member for Scarborough-Guildwood being there tonight in Ottawa. Chris Stockwell, Cheri DiNovo, former Conservative MPP, current NDP MPP on the right-hand side of the table. Marci McDonald, author of The Armageddon Factor, The Rise of Christian Nationalism in Canada. We thank you for kickstarting a real interesting debate in this country. Thank you so much, Marci.